Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. As always, this is Mike, and if you like the content that you find here, please consider liking and subscribing. In this video, this is going to be part one of a couple that are geared around working with objects in the pipeline. So when you're working with PowerShell, you're familiar with having a lot of different commandlets that you run that produce output. And when a commandlet produces output, it creates .NET objects that are placed into PowerShell's pipeline. There are a few commandlets that most people who use PowerShell use quite frequently to manage those objects. So they are geared around working with pretty much anything that would be put into the pipeline. So in this video, we're going to be looking at three particularly. So we're going to look at sort object, measure object, and finally where object. And where object has a bit of filtering in it. So we're going to talk about basic filtering syntax, advanced filtering syntax, and the potential here for optimizing filter performance. So you can kind of make or break the experience here. So we want to make sure everything is as good as we could possibly make it. Right? So with that being said, let's switch over to our lab environment here and look at our first commandlet. So let's say, for instance, we are using PowerShell, and let's say we happen to run a query. So maybe we're grabbing I don't know, a bunch of services here. So maybe we'll grab all the services that start with the letter B, right? Something like that. And we see that 4 results come back from that. Now, normally when you are working with some type of commandlet that puts objects in the pipeline, so some type of commandlet that produces output, that output's normally going to be sorted in some way. And like for instance on this one, we see that there is a sort happening here. So we can see it's sorted alphabetically by name, right? So we can see that if we kind of display all of the services that are running on this computer, again, we can see that there is a sort here on the name property. Let me scroll the way up to the top here to see it. Okay, so we got AD, AJ, AL, AP, and so on, right? So that sort is happening. Now, what if, though, I wanted to change the sort around? Okay, so maybe I don't want it to be sorted alphabetically. Maybe I want it to be sorted some other way. Okay, so let me start off with that smaller result set so we can kind of see the result on the screen here. So here's the default sort that's happening with this output. And if I want to change it, that's where the commandlet sort object comes into play. So you can use sort object and tell it what property you want it to sort on. So in this case, I'll tell it I want to sort on status. And we'll go ahead and run and notice that it did in fact sort off of that. Okay. Now, one thing though, when a lot of people see this, if they're messing around with the get service commandlet, is the status. Even though it looks like it's a bunch of text here, so you would think it should be running should come first and then stop. That's not really the value that's in status. So there is a type of object in there called a service controller status object, and that assigns values of 1 to stopped and 4 to running. So that's why stop showed up first here and running showed up second. Okay. Not that you have to know that to use sort object, but that's just kind of a bit, under the covers of what's happening here. Now, the thing to note though is if you don't like the order or you want to change the order, so this was going from like, basically in service controller status terms here from smallest to largest, okay, stopped and then running. If you want to flip it backwards, you can use the descending parameter on sort object, okay, if I wanted to do that. Okay, so now we can see the runnings come first and the stopped come second, right? So we can do something like that. Right? Now, with it here, again, you could sort on pretty much anything that's being put into the pipeline. Like, for instance, if maybe I change my directory to C:\Windows, and I do a listing of the files there by doing get child item. Okay, I can see there's a bunch of folders and files here, right? And sorted by name. Now notice there is a length property, for instance. Okay, so if I wanted to, let's maybe clean the output up here and say, maybe I just want to see files. Okay, so notice they are sorted by the name property here to start with. And if I wanted to, I could change that sort around. So sort object, property length. And now notice they're sorted by the length property. Okay, so there's the 92 there and all the way up to 484, 8224. Okay, so that's the length into bytes. And if I wanted that to be backwards, okay, so this was again the commandlet that sorted it by the length from smallest to largest, I can use descending and it'll sort it the other way. Right? So you have the ability to do that as well. Right? Now, one thing to note with the commandlets I'm going to go over. When I first start teaching it and showing it to you all, I am using I'm using the full commandlet name, the full parameters. I'm not using parameters positionally at all. So that's something though that a lot of people will do. So this that I just ran here, so let's say we'll just use the length one here. So what I just ran there, a fair amount of abbreviation could be done with that. All right, so let's kind of look at that. So with this, property is a positional parameter. Okay, so you don't have to use that there. And then secondly, there's an alias for sort object, and it's just literally the word sort. Right? So I look at that, and there we go. That runs exactly the same. Right? So when you see something like this, okay, sort length, what it's really referring to is sort object property length. Right? So that's kind of the fun part with it where a lot of people could use the aliases, and I certainly do as well. So alias with positional parameter and everything drawn out in the full syntax. Right? So the next commandlet to talk about here is measure object. So what measure object does, let's rerun this query here for get child item. All right, and we run that. And again, we could see, here's all the files that are in the Windows directory. So not the folders, just the files. And maybe I want to know how many are there. So that's where you can take anything that produces output, anything that throws objects into the pipeline, and send it to the commandlet measure object. And what it can do in its simplest form here is just count up the amount of objects that were in the pipeline. Right? So in this way, just lets you know how many are there. Right? Now, there are, though, other properties that you can tell measure object to fill out if you wanted to. Okay, so if we were so inclined to do so, we could tell measure object that in addition to doing count, which it will do automatically, I want to pay attention to the length property and I want to see maybe the minimum value. So I use the minimum parameter. So that is a switch parameter. You don't have to feed it any data. It's by using it, you're turning on that you want to see that. So I go ahead and run it and filtering on or looking for the length and finding the object that has the smallest value for the length property. And that's 92. So let's see if that was correct. So here's all of our files that are in the Windows directory. And if you look, the smallest one is in fact 92. So it did get it correct. All right. Now you could also tell it to look at the maximum. So that would be find, out of the 20 objects in the pipeline, find me the largest length value. I could also do a sum. So that would take all of the values for length for all of the 20 objects and add them up. And I could also ask it for the average. Right? So these are my 4 parameters that I'm using here. They're all switch parameters. So I can go ahead and run that, and it gives me the facts for what's going on here. So 92 is the smallest, this 484 one is the largest. Add everything up, you get that, and take that, divide it by 20, and you get that. So that would be your average. So the average file size for the files in the Windows directory is this, right? So 375,024.85 bytes is your average file size, right? Um, Now, with measure object, just like sort, let me just bring it back to the smallest one here. There is an alias for it of just measure, so you can run it like that. And the property that you wanted to filter on is positional. So you don't actually have to type out dash property length. So I could tell it, use the length property and grab me, I don't know, the minimum value. And you could see that works as well. All right. So length can be the is being sent over to the property parameter, and we're using measure as the alias of the full commandlet measure object. Now, the next one we're going to talk about here is where object. So with where object, this acts as a filter. Okay, so let's say, for instance, we were looking at services. So maybe get service and name. Let me grab again just a bunch of the ones that started with the letter B, just to work with a small result set. Right? And now let's say I want to filter this. So that's where the commandlet where object comes into play, where object acts as a filter. So the basic syntax to work with where object is using the property parameter, right? So I could specify a property. In this case, maybe I want to sort on status, and I can do different comparison operators. So there's a few of them to be aware of here. So there's a dash EQ that signifies if something is equal or not, a dash NE for not equal, a dash GT for greater than, GE for greater than or equal to, dash LT for less than, dash LE for less than or equal to, and then dash like, which is a comparison that's specific for string objects. So for properties that have string objects as their data. And what's interesting about like is you can use wildcard operators with it. So kind of like I did up here with like B star, for instance. Right? Now, all of these comparison operators are case insensitive. Okay, so that means they don't care if the filter is, if it's a string object, if it's capital letters or lowercase letters. However, any one of these can be made to be case sensitive by just putting the letter C in the front of it. So CEQ would be a case sensitive equal. And a C and E would be a case sensitive not equal, right? So any of those can be made to be case sensitive just by adding that C in front of them, right? Now, so let's say in this case, I want the services that are running. Okay, so let me double back here just to show what's happening here. So before I do any of this, if I send this to measure object, there's 4 objects in the pipeline. So this commandlet was producing 4 objects as its result, and that's what's being passed over to here. Now I want to filter for the ones that are running, so that should eliminate 2 of the possibilities here, 2 of the objects. So I could do where object property. Use the property parameter. The property I want to filter on is status. The comparison operator I'm going to use is equal. And then the value that I want to use, I want to keep the ones that were running, I think I said. So we could type in the word running. And we execute the command line here, and we see the results here. And you could also send it over to measure object and see that in fact it is filtering 2 of them out of the pipeline. Okay, so where object is filtering what objects we want to keep into the pipeline. So with this comparison here, if something evaluates to true, like if status equals running, so whatever objects that evaluates to true as, those are the objects that get to stay. And for anyone that evaluates to false, those are the objects that are removed from the pipeline. All right? So where object is, again, one of these commandlets that can filter pretty much anything when it comes to objects in the pipeline. So for instance, let's go back to my list here of files that were in the Windows directory. Right? And I can see I've got, a few of them here. Now, maybe I want to filter based on, I don't know, some arbitrary file size, something like that. So maybe we'll bring this over to where object, and we'll do property length, and maybe we'll do greater than, and let's see, what would be a good greater than? How about, let's say 50,000. Okay, and notice that knocks out a good part of the list here. Okay, so only length that's greater than 50,000 are staying around. So notice there's no 92, 276, 219, all of those, even 48, 122, that got removed out. So the only ones that are left are the length is greater than 50,000. Right? Those are the ones that got to stay. Now with where object, there is a bit of abbreviation that goes with it. Okay? So first of all, where object actually has two aliases to make it nice and confusing. So the first alias is just the word where, and you see the query runs exactly the same, as it did up here. Okay, so that works using where. And secondly, it has an alias of just question mark, like so. And I run that, and again, you see it works exactly the same. All right. Now, the second way you can cut down on a bit of typing here is property is a positional parameter. So in this case, I don't have to use it. So literally, I can cut the query down to just that. And notice it works exactly the same again. Okay, so this doesn't look like PowerShell here, but it in fact is. So this is the alias for where object, and this value length is being sent positionally to the property parameter on where object. And this value belongs to this comparison parameter right here. All right? So that is the basic syntax that goes with where object. And the basic syntax allows for just a single comparison. Right? Now, with it, though, there is the potential to do an advanced syntax as well. It uses a different parameter. So rather than property, like we see here, the advanced syntax uses a parameter called filter script. And in filter script, that allows for different criteria to be used. Something that's called property dereferencing if you wanted to do that. All right. So let's say first here, let's say we're going to do, let's say we'll take this query here. So you just saw basic syntax right here. And let's retool this query to do advanced syntax. So I'm going to do the exact same filter. I'm just going to use the advanced syntax to do it. So we're going to use filter script as the parameter. And a filter script takes a script block as its data. And remember, if you've looked at my previous videos talking about different objects in PowerShell, when you have a script block, remember that's a type of data where you can actually put code in there. And PowerShell has a couple variables that reference the objects in the pipeline. So $_ or $PS item. So I can use those variables to reference the objects in the pipeline that were put there by this commandlet over here. Okay. So to do that, I can do dollar underscores. That's the one I prefer to use. Dot is my separator. And then the property that I want to filter on, which in this case is length. And let's say we're going to do dash EQ. Oh, no, it was greater than. My bad. So dash GT and then 50,000. All right. Now, since that's a number, I don't have to put it in quotes. But if you're using string values inside a script block, you have to put them in quotes, right? But if I go ahead and run that, you can see the exact same results pop up here. So here was the basic syntax, and here was the advanced syntax, right? So property versus filter script. Okay, now I mentioned with filters with filter script and with a script block, you can do other things with this. So for instance, let's say if I wanted to do another comparison. So I can use the and parameter or the or parameter. So I can do, something is this and something is that. Or so where both comparisons have to evaluate to true, or if you use an or, either one can evaluate to true, right? So let's say I'm going to do an and then we'll say, again, the object in the pipeline, which is, each of these, are the objects in the pipeline, dollar underscore dot, maybe we'll do name. Oops, sorry there. So do name, and maybe we'll do, how about this? How about we use like? Let's use like, and then in quotes, we'll do B star, right? So something like that. And notice it's showing just files that are, the length is greater than 50,000, and the name is like starting with the letter B, right? And that matches these two right here, right? Let me draw this a little better. So those two right there. And that's what we got for our result. So we combined the two together, right? Now, let's say though, let's do something like get service, and let's see here. So get service name. No, let's see. How many services start with the letter S? Okay, good. We got a good list here. Okay. So let's say that's what we're starting with. And let's say we're going to filter it to just find the ones that are running. So let's do where object, and we'll do filter script, and we'll just start with a basic one of those. So we'll grab the status property from the objects in the pipeline, and we'll say equal running. Okay, so I'm putting running in quotes because it is a piece of text. So all of your strings in a script block have to be in quotes. Okay, and that cuts the list down there. Okay, so now here's the next part here. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to only show ones that the name is greater than, let's say, let's pick this one arbitrarily. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So let's say I only want to see ones whose name has more than 5 characters in it. Okay? So let me kind of set the stage for where I'm going here. This is what's called property dereferencing. So it's when you want to filter not on the direct properties for the object in the pipeline. Okay, because remember with get service, that's producing a service controller object. And that service controller object has certain properties on it. Okay, so like if I take this and pipe it to get member, I could see the properties that are there on our service controller object. All right. So now notice though, name is an alias, so it's really referencing service name. And if we look at service name, we could see it's a string object. Okay, so even your properties, the data in them are objects in their own right. Okay, so you can work with the properties of those objects. So for instance, like if I put just put some letters in quotes, and that's a string object. Pipe that over to get member, and you could see that a string object, I probably shouldn't use the word string there. Let's just, I don't know, type something, text, okay? And pipe that over to get member, okay? So that is putting into the pipeline a string object. And notice that a string object has a length property. Okay, so that's how many characters are in the string. Okay, is basically how that works. Okay, so what I want to do here is let's run this query first, and then let's add another to it. So let's do an and we'll do same thing. The object in the pipeline, so that's dollar underscore, so that represents the service controller. Dot the let's do service name, which is, so that right there produces the string that is in the service name property. So now we're working with the string object, and then I do another dot and I call the length. So the length is the length of the string object that's in the service name property for the object that's in the pipeline. Right? And we'll say greater than, what did I say I want to do? 5, I think? Yeah, let's go with that. Okay. And notice that now cuts down the list. So this one got eliminated out. This one got eliminated out. Right? And the rest all have their name as greater than 5 characters. Okay, so that's a neat thing that we could do here with filter script is we can use property dereferencing. So we could do filters not just on the direct properties of the object in the pipeline, but whatever those objects are, the properties of those objects, right? So that makes it pretty handy as well. Now, one thing though that happens with filtering those, it's very easy to get carried away with things with where object. So some commandlets in PowerShell, you don't need to use where object a lot because they happen to have filtering built into them already. So for instance, let's say I was doing Active Directory. So let me pull up help here on get AD user. You'll notice that there is a filter parameter here. Okay, so that can help cut down on the amount of data that's going into the pipeline. Okay, like imagine you're a company that's large in size, like you have thousands of users. I would not want to run, get AD user, have that grab every user, maybe that's thousands of results and into PowerShell's pipeline, and then use where object to filter it down to maybe like the 5 or 10 that you're looking for. Okay, so when the original commandlet has filtering, try to use that rather than where object when you need to filter. Okay, now what if the base commandlet doesn't really have filtering built into it? Well, if we look at something like help on get service here, any parameter that takes string can potentially accept wildcards into it. Okay, so we could potentially do something like that, again, to cut down on the result size that's being put into PowerShell's pipeline. Okay, so with that being said, let me throw two command lines up here. So let's say I do get service, and let's pipe that over to where object, and we'll do filter script. And let's say we'll do dollar underscore dot status equals running. And we'll do and dollar underscore dot name like, and we'll do B star, right? Do something like that, something small. Okay, and you notice I get 2 results. Okay, finally. Now, let me change this query. I will produce the exact same result, but I'm going to do it a little bit differently. So let's take that second query out of there. And then let's throw in the beginning here, get service name B star. right? Something like that. And notice, again, produces the exact same results. Okay, so which one did it more efficiently? All right, so if you look at, let's say this top one here. So if we take this piece right here, how many objects is that putting into PowerShell's pipeline? So if I do um, get service and pipe that over to measure object, I can see that that was putting 216 objects into the pipeline. So this right here puts in 216 objects, and then this right here filters it down to 2. Now, down here, if you remember from earlier, if I ran just this part, remember that was 4 objects into the pipeline. There's 4 services that start with the letter B, and then this was filtering it down to 2. So the bottom one here is the clear winner when it comes to efficiency. Okay, because the max amount of objects it's working with is like 4. Okay, so that's what you want to try and look at when you're evaluating filter performance. Is how many objects is the base commandlet, the commandlet you're starting with, putting into the pipeline, and is there a way, if you have to filter it, that you can build the filtering into the first commandlet on your line? Guys, so you want to get your filtering as close to the left of the command line as possible. All right? That's what we refer to as being as efficient as possible. Now, granted, if you're working with, a couple hundred objects, does it really matter? Maybe not, but it's a good practice to keep in mind. All right? So last thing, and I just realized I forgot to mention this, so let me just do that quick right now. Aliases and positional parameters. So like we talked about earlier with where object, it has aliases of just where and question mark. So something like this. And remember that filter script is a positional parameter as well. So you don't actually have to type it out. Very few times people actually do. So notice that'll run exactly the same as well. All right, so doesn't really look like PowerShell though, does it? But this is again the alias for where object, and this script block is being passed to the filter script parameter. So how does PowerShell get away with that? Well, where object has 2 positional parameters here. You got property, okay, which takes a string object. So any strings are passed to the property parameter, and you got filter script here, and filter script takes a script block. So any script blocks are passed to the filter script parameter, okay, positionally. Okay? And again, if you don't remember what that means positionally and stuff like that, go back and have a look at my video on get help. Okay, so I know it's a bit on the long one. There's a lot to help, but I do go through explaining in the syntax block how to tell what all of this is, how to tell a positional parameter, how to tell mandatory versus optional parameters, how to tell parameter sets, all of that stuff. So have a look at that video as a refresher if you need it. Right? So anyway, so that's looking at our first bit of object commandlets here that work with objects in the pipeline. So we talked about sort object, measure object, and where object, and looked at the different forms of filtering we can do with where object. So thanks everybody. Appreciate you all tuning in and listening. If this video was helpful, informative, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. I greatly appreciate it, and we will see you in the next video. So have a good one, everyone.